Greetings, boys and girls. I hope you have been enjoying the skits that the pastoral team has been putting out. Not only enjoying, but putting the lessons to life. And those lessons staying in our hearts, transforming our hearts so that we can prepare for the soon coming of Christ. So today, I have a story for you. But before we get into the story, I just want to tell you some of the things that happen in our spiritual walk. We call this the Great Controversy. So the Great Controversy is the war that is between good and evil, and the war that is between Satan and Jesus. So when we get those lessons from the skits and apply them into our lives and become good people who have Christ's righteousness, then guess what? There's someone who is not going to be happy. Like, not happy. Satan is not going to be happy. But that's okay, because we do not belong to Satan, okay? We belong to Christ. And Christ has a big smile because we are doing what's right. But when we're doing what's right, when we go back to what's bad, then Jesus is not happy. So let me tell you a story that is related to what I have just said. So I come from the beautiful country of Zimbabwe in down southern Africa. So there was a family, a husband and a wife. They were called the Ndlovu family. Do you want to try and say that? The Ndlovu family. So you can practice saying that. So the Ndlovu family, the husband and the wife, they didn't have a child. So they said to each other, what shall we do? We don't have a child. So like any other family, they thought of adopting a child. But in this part of the world, at the time they were living, they didn't have foster care homes where you could go and adopt a child from. So there were some kids that were raised on the streets. They didn't have parents. They just were like a group of young people that lived on the streets. Some lived under the bridges, some lived under cardboard houses, and some lived under metal sheet roofs, things like that. So these were called street kids. So they decided to go on the street and find one of the street kids. So the Ndlovu family, the wife said, well, that sounds like a good idea. And they said, wow, why don't we go like right away? So they were so excited. They went on the street. Lo and behold, for sure, they found a group of young people who lived on the street. And they found one other young people who was just like sitting by himself. And they decided they were not going to approach the group of young people or the group of street kids. They were going to approach just that one. And they went and they found him and they started talking with him. Before you could know, they managed to convince him to stay with them. And he said, okay, that's fine. They didn't need to get through a lot of paperwork at this time in this part of the world. So they just agreed with this guy and they walked with him home. So when they got home, this child was so dirty. His hair was long. He was hungry. His clothes were torn. Everything looked really out of place on him. So they said, okay, welcome to our house. What we're going to do, we're just going to have you go take a shower, which he did. And after he took a shower, he smelled good. He was smelling bad before. He smelled good. And they gave him a haircut. They gave him new clothes. And they gave him his own room with toys, with a closet. And he had his own clothes, his own shoes. He was so happy. He had never seen anything like that before. So he was thrilled. He was so happy. When he was dressed, well, nicely dressed, he went to the dinner table and he saw amazing food. They had made dinner and they ate together. They enjoyed every single moment. The Ndlovus were very happy, and they decided to give him a name. So they give him a name to this guy, to this new family member. His name, they called him Ngoba. Ngoba, which means victory. So they gave him that name. If you want to try saying Ngoba, Okay, you can try and practice on your own. Noah. So Noah was living in this house and he really loved it. Days went by, weeks went by, months went by. But there was one day Noah started to feel out of place. He started to feel lonely. He started remembering all those fun stuff that he used to do with his friends. He remembered the streets. He remembered how they used to find food in trash cans and how they used to find food at bakeries where they would just get food that was thrown out and they would fight for that food. He just thought that, oh man, that was so much fun. Here only that I get to see is this old couple all the time, morning, afternoon, and evening. I don't see anybody else. I'm kind of feeling lonely. So he devised a plan. He said, I know what I'm going to do. When Mr. and Mrs. Ndlovu go out, I'm going to run away. So lo and behold, the next day, Mr. and Mrs. Ndlovu went to town, and Noah's plan was very ready to be implemented. So he said, I am going to run out. And then he took a loaf of bread from the fridge. He put it in his plastic bag. He didn't take anything else with him. Off he went back to the streets. He ran street after street after street after street. And then finally he got to town, to the downtown area where his friends were. When he got to his friends, they couldn't recognize him because he looked so different. But they recognized the voice. Oh, they were so happy. They saw the bread in his hands. They went and they grabbed it. They tore the bread apart. They started eating there the same way they used to do. Noah was back and everyone was so happy. And Noah went back into his previous lifestyle. His new clothes started getting dirty and greasy again. He went back to become a street kid again. When Mr. and Mrs. Ndlovu came back from town, they were so surprised. Their hearts were broken. Noah was nowhere to be found. And they knew that Noah had gone back to the streets. So, this story teaches us one thing. There's one person who is Jesus, who feels the same way as Mr. and Mrs. Ndlovu felt when he sees us going back to our old habits. Maybe during these past weeks, you've enjoyed all the skits, you've learned so much. And maybe previously your mom, your teachers, your dad, your pastors have been teaching you amazing and incredible lessons that you are starting to change your character. You're starting to change the way you do things. You're starting to care for other people. You're starting to stay away from video games and from things that defile your mind. But when you go back to the old habits, Jesus is not happy. You're like Noah who goes back to the streets. Solomon says it is like a dog who goes back to eat his vomit. Apostle Paul, he had a similar problem with the church at Galatians. He wrote a letter to them because he had heard that they had departed from the things that he taught them. He taught them about Christ, how they were able to be saved by faith through the righteousness of Christ. But they went back to the traditions of the Jews, thinking that they were going to be saved by their own works. Even the language that the Bible uses, you can see that Paul was not happy. So I'm going to read it to you. Galatians chapter 3, verse 1. It says, O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ hath been evidently set forth, crucified among you. This only would I learn of you, received ye the Spirit by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith? Are ye so foolish, having began in the Spirit, are ye now made perfect by flesh? So Paul calls this foolishness. He was very disappointed. And guess what? When we go back to our old habits, God is disappointed as well. But God gives us a lot more chances, like how Paul was writing to the Galatians. He was giving them another chance to reconsider their ways, to come back to Christ. The book of 1 John says, Brethren, I wish you would not sin. 1 John chapter 2, verse 1. But if you sin, you have an advocate with the Father, which is Jesus Christ, who is able to bring you back. So if we had gone back to your old habits, knowing that you shouldn't do it, maybe you started stealing again, maybe you started not talking well to your parents, maybe you started hating other people, maybe you started going back to video games or movies or anything, but you remember the lessons that Christ taught you, you should be able to come back to Him. His arms are wide open, and He'll be happy if we don't go back to the path of old habits that don't please Him. So my appeal at this moment is that all the skits that you're going to watch, I'm just going to promise you there's another amazing skit that is coming very soon. All the skits that you are learning from, stay with the lessons. Keep them in your heart and implement them in your life. And ask Jesus to be able to help you to stay on the path.